play a key role in poverty reduction and economic development. It's no wonder one of the biggest campaign promises from the Kenya Kwanza government was to uplift this vibrant segment of our economy with the Hustler Fund, a 50 billion shilling fund that mutated from a grant during the campaign period to a loan product at a single-digit rates to now a 9% credit facility with a savings component at 50%. Now, my guest joining me tonight will look at what that means for MSMEs in this country and whether it is the silver bullet to see them thrive in the economy. But first, let's take a quick look at some of the facts on MSMEs and what defines them really quickly. Now, when we talk about MSMEs, they are usually judged by the size. We're talking about micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Many definitions, including turnover, can be used, but we'll look at the number of employees. So micro enterprises are less than 10 employees, small enterprises 10 to 49, and medium enterprises 50 to 99. Now, ownership by gender is quite interesting here. 47.9% are owned by males, 31.4% female, and jointly owned are 20.7%. 60.7% of unlicensed businesses are owned by women. Very interesting fact, which I'll also raise with my guests. Now, what is their role in the Kenya economy? According to Kipra, which is the Institute on Public Policy and Research, MSMEs play a big role in Kenya's economy. As I said earlier, they, of course, employ 90% of the total labor force in the country. That's 14.9 million Kenyans right now that are employed by MSMEs. What are the challenges that they face? Number one on that list is access to credit. Another is ineffective marketing and a lack of international standards. And of course, there's several groups helping to capacitate them in that regard. Source of funding, which is probably the biggest and where the Hustler Fund comes in. 80.6% get their funding from family or their own funds, savings. 4.2% from loans from friends. 5.6% are bank loans. 1.4% from chamas. 0.4% from cooperatives and 0.1%, that's interesting, government. All right, introducing my panel really quickly. Joining me now are Zuhura Odhiambo, who is the CEO of New Revenue Solutions Africa, as well as Victor Otieno, an SME consultant and a policy advocate with the VIFA Consult. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me begin with you, Victor. You know, when you hear the cooperatives and MSME cabinet nominees saying there is no such thing as free money, this Hustler Fund is going to be affordable credit. What do you make of that?
Thank you very much, Victoria. I think, as you rightly mentioned, one of the challenges that SMEs face is access to finance. And I think the challenge that we see, as Kenyans is during the campaign period, the government had proposed to give access to credit, which was interest-free. Now we are seeing that that has shifted to, having some level of interest. And what we heard also is that the solution around the Hustler Fund is to bring down the cost of borrowing, which is very interesting, and also just ensuring that they work with fintechs to ensure that more access is given to SMEs, which I think is a good thing, as well as changing tact and using the platforms of circles to be able to drive access to finance by SMEs, which I think are all positive. But I think there is also contradiction in the sense that the government is giving access, but also is creating a barrier by saying that you need to be able to save at the same time for you to be able to access this fund. So that is a contradiction that we note.
Zuhura, do you think this Hustler Fund will indeed bring down the cost of borrowing, as Victor put it? The Kipra stats were showing that 1% of MSMEs in the country actually source their funding from government. So do you think it will actually work in helping them access affordable credit?
Thank you so much, Victoria, and this lovely conversation. Just the passion that we have around the SMEs and the MSMEs, understanding that they are the main people who are actually driving the economy of every country. And just seeing the Hustler Fund and some of the gains that we've been promised from the current government about the Hustler Fund, very excited around it, around the MSMEs and the SMEs. One thing that we need to understand, even as we get excited, and today I know as I was following Chilugue's interview, and noting that we are trying to bring the percentage under 10 and most likely 9, and we'll be able to see that by end of next week or even at the forecasted launch date in December. Yes, we are looking at more SMEs, being able to access the finance. We've seen a lot of things that have been done even with government to the Credit Guarantee Fund, where they have issued more than 4 billion Kenya shillings in more than like 46 counties, which has actually been a good thing. But as they always say, vitu kwa ground ni different in the context of sometimes the accessibility of these funds and also from the Credit Guarantee Fund, we know 7 banks were actually put down who have actually been doing some good work and seeing the borrowing that has been there. But again, some issues is more of, as much as the interest rates are coming down, which is a good thing, we need to understand it's not about just the fund that is coming in place, but it's more about how do we ensure that this fund actually is successful? How do we ensure I borrow today and I can be able to, be able to sell it? How am I able to sell my product? What if I got the loan and I'm not able to sell? That means that I'm accruing more and more interest than even the lowered interest that was there. And that is one thing that is also very key. What about the various understanding around the challenges that the SMEs face? Because it's one thing to give me fund, but what if I need to scale my business? It's a different story around it. Have you understood that part of knowing that if we scale up our businesses, it's better for the SMEs? So there are a lot of things that can ensure that we're not having NPLs. I mean, we've seen the local banks and even the microfinances, of course, having the non-performing loans that have been put forward. And we need to look at it as much as the Hustler Fund is coming. Have we understood the temperature of the SME? And the SME coming in, and how are they able to ensure that they are paying for this loan, but also growing their businesses to drive the economy?
Victor, let's get practical here. When you look at the Hustler Fund and how it's structured in terms of access, has the government gotten that right? Say, for instance, if I'm a hawker, and they're saying right now in terms of distribution, they're going to use digital platforms, chamas, SACCOs. Are those effective ways to reach, especially the bottom of the pyramid business owners?
Yeah, so I think that's backed by empirical evidence. And there's a World Bank report called, The Long Shadow of Informality, which alludes to using digital platforms and some of the platforms where SMEs are in terms of the current way in which they're accessing finance, which is basically through table banking, through chamas, through SACCOs. Because if you look at the business models of financial institutions, it's collateral-based. So it means that a lot of SMEs, of course, over 79%, being informal, they cannot be able to access the formal channels. So these platforms are a good place to allow them to be able to access finance. So I think it's a good thing in terms of working with fintechs. Remember, the current credit guarantee scheme is currently working with formal financial institutions who, based on their business model, would not normally give credit to SMEs. So working with fintechs who are already lending to SMEs, I think is a good starting point. What is also very interesting is the lack of mention of the Movable Property Securities Act, which is also an initiative that was intended for SMEs to use the local assets that they have, your TVs, your fridge, etc. I think that has not been mentioned. So I think in terms of pronouncement, I think it's in the right direction. But the challenge is it's not the silver bullet, in the sense that if we don't address other challenges that SMEs face, which are issues around access to finance, access to market, sorry. If you don't address issues around regulation, the cabinet secretary nominee had attempted to mention that in terms of how can they be able to address the Kanjo, being harassed by Kanjo, which points to the bigger challenge that we have in this country in terms of a very taxing regulatory and license regime, so that even if you give me access to finance, but the cost of doing business is high, I can't be able to access, markets. Most of us in the country are doing wholesale retail. So we are buying to sell. Our profit margins are so thin that if we don't holistically address all the issues that SMEs face in terms of challenges, then probably that fund is going to fail because we'll have very high non-performing loans.
You know, Zuhura, let's turn to the gender question when it comes to businesses in this country. I read a very concerning statistic from Kipra that said, 60.7% of unlicensed businesses were owned by women. What does that mean in terms of women scaling their businesses and formalizing them as well?
Victoria, being a gender champion, this is one thing that we have really brought on table and tried to talk about in the aspects of even understanding some of the challenges, because women in the business area, I'm telling you, it's one and the other thing that, really needs to be crafted well. We also understand from the financial institutions, they've realized that women are actually good payers of loans. And not just saying I represent one of them, but want to say that for sure you are very clear about it, that once we have actually heard that this is what we need to do, we definitely pay the loans. But then we are seeing a lot of challenges, whether it is even we're trying to encourage, even as much as we're getting the Hustler Fund and the accessibility to that fund. What about the bigger part of the business, the supplier diversity? Right now, what is clear, it's not just women. We're looking at the youth. We're looking at the PWDs, the people living with disability, where our organization, the private sector, we're seeing being a member of Kipra, seeing a lot of work being done around that area in the private sector. But in the ministries also, yes, there's AGPO that has come through also, but there are opportunities that still are created that should be there for women to do the business. Now, accessing these funds, and sometimes it becomes very hard because even if they ask you for assets, we know 90% of the MSMEs are informal. And can you imagine if we formalized? But our question around it is the formalization should actually be, the simplification of formalization should actually be what we are focusing on, where I'm asked for 1 or 2 documents and be able to trade business, even if I've not been in business for 5 years. And we're seeing a lot of youth coming into that bracket as well. And then how are we ensuring that the government, the private sector are offering, and it's not a matter of having a company registered by a man, but because I'm the wife, I become director for bidding. But end of day, it's a man's company. And those are some of the things women are seeing. And the other thing is also payments. We can pay. We have seen government actually say that, some people will have to pay interest if they're not paying some payments that these SMEs need. But that is not coming forward sometimes. So you find that you've got credit, things are being auctioned. And even just speaking from as the chair of the Event Managers Association of Kenya, we saw during COVID, some of our members go through a lot of auction because they had asset financing. They couldn't actually be able to pay for the lorries they're using. They had tentage that is stuck all over. Women businesses that shut down during that particular time. So even as we're looking at the Hustler Fund, we want to ensure that all other aspects have actually been looked into, where we can access the finance, we can actually be able to access the markets, and we can access these particular tenders for the women and even the people living with disability. And justice for the women as well. The women in business are not having, there are cases that are still pending in 1 or 2 areas. So as you say it, we are ready to do business. We are ready to revive the economy of this country as women. But we need all these other aspects also to be part of what the Hustler Fund is going to offer for it to be a success.
Okay, thank you so much, Zuhura and Victor, for your time and insights on this. Of course, we'll be following. It was the biggest campaign promise